In this lab, we take a look at specific antibiotics. So this lab is done very similarly to the disinfectant lab. The main difference is for this lab that our discs are already soaked with the antibiotics. So we don't actually have to put any antibiotics on the discs. They come preloaded with antibiotics. But we get the results the same way. We still measure the zones of inhibition around the discs. So this is E. coli, and my first disc here in quadrant 1 is penicillin. We can see that penicillin is not effective against E. coli. We have colonies growing all the way up to the disc. This makes sense. We know that penicillin attacks peptidoglycan. E. coli is a gram-negative bacterium, so it doesn't have the thick layer of peptidoglycan like a gram-positive would. So this is to be expected in these results. In quadrant 2, we have novobiocin, and I'll measure my zone here of novobiocin, and I have 22 millimeters. So my zone of inhibition for novobiocin is 22 millimeters. In quadrant 3, I have erythromycin. This one also effective, or pretty effective. We've got a pretty large zone of about 21 millimeters. And then in quadrant 4, I have streptomycin. And my zone of inhibition is 19 millimeters. If I look at my next plate here, these have not been as effective as the erythromycin and the novobiocin and the streptomycin that we saw on the first plate, but we do still see some zones of inhibition. But what I notice when I look at these zones for quadrant 5, which is tetracycline, and quadrant 8, which is kanamycin, and you'll have to look real close here. Let me bring this closer. You'll notice that we do have a zone, but within the zone, we have a little bit of growth. And typically what we're looking at with that is that we have some bacterial colonies that may be resistant to that particular antibiotic. So we'll measure the zone, and for tetracycline, our zone is about 11 millimeters, but we'll make a note that we have some colonies that are growing within the zone. In 6 here, I had a little accident when I was putting this disc on here. I dropped here and then slid across over here. So we're not going to count this zone. We're going to count the zone over here where the disc actually landed. This is neomycin. Neomycin is one of the components of Neosporin, or triple antibiotic ointment. And I see that my zone for neomycin is about 16 millimeters. 7 is chloramphenicol. This is one that we don't use very often because it does have some pretty nasty side effects, but we can see our zone here is about 18 millimeters. And then for kanamycin, our zone is 18 millimeters, but we do put the note on there that we do have some resistant colonies. We have some growth within our zone of inhibition. So for antibiotics, we have a standardized chart that we compare our zones to, and you'll find that with your lab. And this is how you'll determine if the bacterium is susceptible, intermediate, or resistant to that particular antibiotic.